This is Dave Monkey, Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial. And we've been talking about leadership, but there's also, that's a major issue for preservation people, to get people to lead. It's a tough world, but we're also in an era of visuality. And so things are changing, and I want to deal with visuality at the moment. We're in an internet era where much of our communication is through visual material. It's okay to be working with radio. Radio has got its place, but this week it was kind of fun because WEF was trying to do some things visually, and it wasn't very easy. And we had a lot of discussions about doing that, and a lot of dependency on a few people who know how to work the technology. We're losing picture theaters, dramatic theaters, and we have to think about that. These places have been social places where you meet and get ideas from each other, you bounce off of each other, you criticize each other in a friendly manner, usually in a friendly manner, sometimes not. But we need that sort of social communication. The virus has prevented that. So we're all very separate, and we can be individuals if we want to be, but we shouldn't be. We should be doing things in group. But Zoom has, and agencies like it, have been very successful in providing us with an opportunity that is a good alternative. You get to see people's faces. That's a help. You have nonverbal communication there, and that allows you to improve your message. So Zoom has facilitated that. It has done it largely without much expenditure. So there's federal interest and in concern, or even international concern, that Zoom should be getting paid for doing this. If it's a public service, if it's a media public service, then you can't really charge for individual programs. That's a problem. It's tacit racism in a way to leave out a certain part of the population because they can't afford or they don't have the computer savvy to do it. So we have to think of ways of doing this so the public will be served. The private industry can charge and does, and it's legitimately used, and it's tremendously innovative. We're faced with some problems. One is that the technocrats are moving fast. It's innovative, it's exciting, it's what we want, but often the equipment on the end of those fiber optics cables is changing by the hour. Our computer software programs sometimes change to the point that an old program won't be supported. So how do we encourage this process? It's simpler than most people realize. they can be participant by having a identification number and for that particular meeting, and a PC for that meeting. We've just done that here. I'm speaking on Zoom right now. You could also be a host, like WEFT has been hosting by Zoom. The city meetings are by Zoom. I think Grand Prairie Friends had a Zoom meeting on Friday night that had at least 55 registrants and a lot of interaction, 2 speakers. And the speakers could provide visual material, and that was helpful. One was talking about Massachusetts, which is a local prairie up north near to Rockford, Northern Illinois University. It was discovered by someone who detected a bird that was fairly rare, and he was or she, I don't know which, was thinking that if that bird was in the vicinity, then it must be a prairie in the vicinity. And he found remnants, and eventually that's become a several thousand acres of nature, remnant part creative and part restoration from cornfield. Those messages are added to by local reporting on what's being done locally. And so we can use these media in different ways, but very positively, we could have a host that might be in charge of the forest preserve, who is also a Grand Prairie Friends CEO, and bring in speakers and host questions and provide information about what the Grand Prairie Friends is doing. Okay. I'm trying to think how we do this sort of thing. It's not easy to do video work. That was painfully obvious at the recent WEF meeting. Often we're dependent on a few people that have the technology. With this program, for instance, typically before it was on remote, we took the radio program and put pictures into it to augment the program and convert it to a video program that went up on YouTube and also on a banner channel 6 2 times a week. YouTube is permanent, and you can get it from any location at any time around the world. So to get it there, we have to be rather astute. Groups like Zoom have made it relatively easy for someone to listen, and also for someone to post, to bring a group of 80 odd people or 50 odd people together. The putting together of images, on the other hand, is difficult. You have to take the image in the field. If you're wanting to say that you're standing in a field of big blue stem and it's starting to fall over as it does in the fall, it's waving its fruiting bodies that are 8 foot tall in the wind, and you can see the ripple across the surface. How do you capture that? That means we have to have photographers that do that sort of job. You can do it if you're the working person who's doing the preservation. It's not going to be as crisp and clear as a specialist, but it can be adequate. You can do it with very good camera, or you can do it with a cell phone, which is adequate. It's not as, it doesn't have the same quality image as a specialized camera, but it is there and on the spot and often in your pocket. But to bring that image back, you have to know that in older times when you are dealing with 18 millimeter or 16 millimeter film, you had to take 10 seconds of film still so that you didn't move. So then you could take a picture for perhaps 40 seconds, and you could override that, or not override it, but add to that sound by speaking into a microphone, hopefully without too much wind sound. And then you would tail off. You might pan, or you might zoom in on a berry or some item of interest, and then gently back off. You probably would have to be on a tripod, because although people think that they can hold a camera still, it's very challenging to hold a camera still for X number of minutes. Your arms aren't used to that. There are various ways around it. You can tie it onto something you can hold, or you can back yourself up against a tree and spread your legs and put your camera on your forehead. But still, taking the photograph in the first place is important. These days, the fairly reserved slow entrance and then movement through a picture and then slow exit has become almost subliminal. You can have picture on top of picture, top of picture, top of picture, and that's understood by people who enjoy that sort of situation, or it can be used more gently. But you have to think about that as you're working in the field. Do you just do short sections without any entrance? And you don't mind if you're cutting into a move or whatever. So first there's a camera, and you have to get into the field. Much of our work is done in the boondocks with prairies, and we have to have transportation to get there, and we have to be there at the right time. Sunlight can affect the way you look at a plant. Rainy day might be interesting because the cloud allows you to be without shadows or harsh shadows. You have to know whether you want to include human artifacts like roads or tanks or whatever, or whether you want to be natural. And if you want to be natural, you can almost be artificially natural when everything around you is human. You have to make that choice. So you may want to program what you're going to take beforehand, but often we're not in that situation. We encounter what we encounter when we're there. To bring that back, that that in olden days, 16 millimeter film, you had to bring it back and then splice it. And you might have a room full of splices, and you had to remember where they were and what was on them. And it took days and days to bring that sort of footage together. If you were a journalist, you tried to program in your camera so that you didn't have to do that. And all you do that too is video, but video gives you a little bit more opportunity because it's not as expensive and it's electronic. And so you can do things with the electronics that you couldn't do with a Bill and Hal camera. But it's still, we find it much easier to use still photographs because editing video is very trying. And I want to encourage people to do that, but you have to know that you are in an era when the movie theaters, the movie industry has lost a lot of its power to individuals. It might be a home movie, or it might be a group get together, and it might be rather rude and crude, or it might be a highly sophisticated electronic movie that you're making. But more people are being able to do it. On the other hand, there's a risk of the technical people being able to do it and other people either can't do it or don't think they can do it. So it puts it in a more rarefied situation. So then you have to think about how you get to other people. And for us, that has included David Witshoney, who is a specialist in media and knows how to put things together. And even so, there has to be a relationship between the editor and the person who has the idea for the film or has done a program that needs to be augmented. So we go to the field and we take our photographs. And this week on Friday, we went to the Pope Prairie in Rantoul, and I was extremely pleased, and so were others. It's in its fall now, and we were picking seed and also sowing seed. We have to consider not only the photography of where we are at, but the ecology of what we're doing. In our case, we have a area that includes old railroad lines and remnant prairie, which is much more like what was here when settlers came, that we leave undisturbed except for the removal of invasive plants or trees. It happens because when railroads go through, they drain the wet, swampy territory that was Champaign County. And that allows trees to invade. So we have that problem. Then we have restoration area. The Pope Prairie removed gravel industry and removed 8 feet of glacial till, which was very good road pack, and left the remaining glacial till. So we tend there to try and replace what was there. So we take seed from the remnant prairie and plant it there, and not try to be too imaginative. Uh, this is a site that has a local content, so it would be different from a creative prairie where you might be wanting to allow the public to view a prairie in its entirety as if it were 1,000 acres of prairie with different niches. If you're lucky, you can create a niche or two with more water, or uh, a bulldozer to uh, provide a different habitat or dry area to the top of a moraine or something like that. So you can be imaginative. So we have those three types of prairie, and we will seed into the imaginative prairie uh, a little more than we would consider doing on the restoration prairie, or and we would not touch at all the remnant prairie, which was includes plants like uh, hoary cocoon or a few of the plants that are representative of what we know of as a remnant prairie. Uh, uh, then we bring uh, that information back to our studio and work on it. You can choose to put the sound on when you're taking the camera, or you can choose to put the sound on in the studio. That can sometimes simplify things because you can line up your visual material. You know how long you have to speak. You can adapt your speak to it. It's not as spontaneous. We don't always have the luxury of that time to do it. We can with a regular program, we can take 3 hours to put in pictures if we have an interesting program. If we talking mainly uh, radio style, we might not have to put in many pictures at all. We might have to choose whether we make a hand-drawn map quickly and photograph it with a cell phone, or scan it with a scanner and use a formal planning map, or we would do it more artistically. So if we're dealing with the detention ponds at 2nd Street, we might have an artist just draw an impression of two ponds. One is shallower and the other one is deeper, and just to give the site situation in a more relaxed and artistic manner, rather than with a formal aerial photography or uh, 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 town and country plan. Uh, so that just recently, after we finished working at Rantoul, Ron Sleater went uh, to Monticello. At Monticello, we have rail bed, and Monticello we were encouraging this. This is why we bought the land in the first place. The railroad bed encouraged the trail, and Monticello has put that in with their own money. You have to think about where your funds come from and what are the apron strings. If you don't want a wide trail that takes out the prairie you're trying to preserve on the edges of each side of the ballast, then if you have your own money, you can do that. And so the Sangamon Bridge Trail, which goes over the Sangamon on one of our truss bridges, is that way oriented, and it's only 8 feet wide, which means that, and the vegetation on either side is maintained. It's across a bottomland, so it's mainly forest. But the principle here is that they didn't use federal or state money, which would both have uh, apron strings for uh, uh, American Disabilities Act or for EPA, and so there's some independence there, and that's rather different from the Kickapoo Trail, for instance, that goes from Urbana to Danville, 25 miles, where a state and federal money and other uh, organizational money and even private money uh, suggests the rules of the game, in our case, a little bit wider than we would like to preserve the dignity of the ecology on the side. Right now, we're being approached by Ameren to consider a pipeline along the corridor, and we have to think about whether we can do that under a trail. You know, the original trail that went over the Sangamon River has been extended by popular vote for another mile. And just recently, $63,000 was put into putting an asphalt surface on that graveled corridor. There's another 4 miles to Cisco, and it almost parallels what Ameren would want to do. So then you have to think about how you would control or establish it in the first place and then maintain it in the second place. We're thinking of a 4-foot trail, which is not nice as far as bicycles at 30 miles an hour passing each other. We don't need that. We don't want that. We want people to be going through often in a one-way direction to enjoy the prairie and to realize what it is, almost in its extinction. So could you put in a 6-inch pipe? Could that be in the center of the ballast? So we would put the pipeline in and then put a trail on top. If you are going to do that, do you have bobcats and equipment that is narrow enough to work it without construction easements? Possibly not, but a construction easement is a temporary easement which allows bigger equipment to come in and install the pipeline and then even put down pallets onto which they would put their equipment, and those pallets can be taken away and the prairie will go back again. Or do you want, say, pipeline to be maintained from the road, and will the organization have access across the railroad bed or across to the railroad bed? We're not really in favor of that. So would this be a change in policy? Can the Ameren, the power company, move in from one end at the section road? Do we have to leave access holes for the pipeline to be inspected, especially if it might leak? It's not usual for that to happen, but there needs to be access. How would you go across little creeks that have trestles for people and for railroads? But usually the pipeline is drilled under the creek, and so we're talking to real estate people, to biologists who know about the prairie, to anthropologists who know about the history of Allerton Park, which is next door, and the history of Sam Allerton, It's almost an archaeological site. Uh, and you have to deal with engineers, all of whom have their own discipline, and it's very hard to bring those all together. There's also the people who use chemicals, and the chemicals are systemic, so if they're sprayed in one place, they can move through a plant to another place. So we would want a corridor without chemicals. So we're thinking, I've said we're reserved, but there's possibilities there. We also have in the wings a trust. Uh, they're willing to put money into the a trail. Uh, I've been very reserved about that at the moment, and that includes members of our board. To uh, be reserved till we get to talk to each other over and over. Talking is a ploy. It's not a ploy. It's a real thing to try and bring people together. And you have to deal with groups. And when you have group members, not all the group members have facility in biology or sociology or what have you. So how do you bring those groups together so that they each know a little bit about the other, enough to be able to form a group and to be innovative and excited in doing something? We all want electricity, we all want gas, and we all want or have, we hope we have people who want to preserve the dignity of our almost lost prairie ecosystem. Uh, so talking helps. Even a little shouting here and there is not too bad. We're not necessarily shouting in violation. We're shouting on an issue that might be more important to one group than another. So a biologist can be upset by uh, herbicide, and engineers can be upset by invasive trees. If there's a easement for power and there's power lines overhead, then if you're on an old power line with copper, that if it gets more electricity than it was built to have, it will expand and drop down and perhaps short to a tree. So engineers have to figure uh, on mowing. And mowing can be helpful, but Ron Sleater visited on Friday the area between Monticello and Cisco, and it has been mowed, which included mowing the crud trees, which we don't like, but which, if mulched, the wood mulch goes down on the ground, and we need to be told when that sort of thing is happening and how it is happening. And the mulch needs to be removed because it takes a lot of energy for plant material to rot. So often, if we remove a tree, we remove it totally and salvage it somewhere else. We don't mulch with the wood that comes from the tree. So it was a little disappointing to realize that that has happened recently without our involvement. So we're dealing with Amarin in two senses, one with gas and one with electricity. We're also dealing with fiber optics, which we're on top of those tensions. And whereas most people got some compensation for fiber optics, uh, we didn't get any compensation for that movement. If it had gone through a farmland, it would have been almost a legal law case to make sure that compensation was made for that maneuver. So once again, we need to talk. Uh, Mowing has increased since World War II. There was an invention of a rotary mower, which has become universal, and it takes everything to a neat billiard table type habitat. It's almost sociologically important that you mow your roadside, because if you don't, you can engender some sociological criticism. We have to think about that. And in other countries, they do it too, but they have been more reserved because often they don't have the power, the gasoline, and the tractors and the mowers to do that. And especially on roadsides, the roadsides are often mown extensively with 15-foot bush hogs. I was interested yesterday to travel past mowing that just went down to the ditch. In order to do that, you don't need a humongous tractor. You need a smaller piece of equipment. So we put in a gas pipe from Monticello to Cisco. We will require smaller equipment to do the job. May take longer, but it may be less deleterious to the corridor. Question then arises as to how we can work with the public and perhaps change the mind a little bit. We had a pocket prairie across from Weft for 30 years, and it was excellent at promoting an understanding of a small pocket prairie that had a small forest. It had edge timber, it had shade in some places, and an open area for prairie, and that was very, very educational. That prairie has been moved to a detention pond. It doesn't have the same tree ecological relationship to edge timber and prairie. It's out in the middle of a detention pond, and we've talked about that elsewhere. It takes water and stores it and lets it out slowly so that it doesn't flood an urban setting. The detention pond is well manicured. From an engineering point of view, it has trails, and the trails are kind of, they're not rectilinear, they're not formal, straight-sided. They're roam around and have hairpin bends and have stairwells, and there's been prairie planted along the edges. So here is an urban setting where you are able to combine a little of the nature with a lot of lawn and ponds. And so recently I decided it was time to create a link or a blog or something that would allow people to understand what a detention pond was and what it looks like at this time of the year, and when you might want to burn the site, and how would you do that, and how do you work with the forest preserve or the park district or the city uh, uh, to do a burn in a safe manner uh, and in an ecological manner. You wouldn't burn all of it, you'd burn part of it because some species do not like to be burned, but others have been used to lightning strikes for years and then used to Indian uh, burning in purposefully because they realize that burning is become essential for the creatures that are there that have gotten to adapted to burning, and if you don't burn, they don't survive very well. Uh, so I got innovative and put a camera on a dolly and rolled it around the trail, and so we have a film that we would like to distribute, but as yet we haven't finished editing it, and uh, it's quite a pain to get. Uh, you can do it simply by butting one visual up against the other, or you can have a nice transition. It takes a little more time. You have to eliminate those areas where you are moving with the dolly, which is rather primitive, and it was photographing the sky rather than the land. Or you were moving the dolly just to move a tripod on the dolly to a new location, and you didn't shut the camera off. Just so snipping out those pieces you don't want and merging them with the pieces that you do want takes hours and a lot of patience. Uh, we hope that we will get through that, and this will be uh, an attempt to uh, work with uh, the general public, especially. They do enjoy it. They rest on the lawns. They visit the prairie areas. They watch the geese, which are a problem, but it's almost like a petting zoo. Uh, and they have tables and places where you can sit and enjoy a meal. And the the city involves two sections, and the park district involves another one. And the creek or the river has been allowed to meander in places where it has to go under the road, like University Avenue. There are 8-foot walk-through pipes that allow the boneyard to move. And on top of there, there's a little horticultural prairie. So how do you take this to the people? It's and who are you taking it to? I have to think about this as a report to people about uh, things that they may not be able to visit. Uh, People who are in assisted living may not get to see the detention pond in the fall. So you're providing a service, but you're also pushing ideas, and those ideas might even be international. I get a message from my sister who's in Australia, and they're running a gallery uh, of some of my prints, Australian and uh, American, and they. Uh, it comes to my mind that we might be able to do a Zoom presentation from here. So this sort of material may become important internationally. just to give an idea, the area where my sister lives is in Albury, on the border between New South Wales and Victoria, where they've been having huge fires and droughts, and you can't imagine. There's a railroad line that goes up Mount Kosciuszko. It's our only tall mountain. I think it's 7,000 feet only, as compared, if you're looking at Everest, it's like 29,000 feet. And it was designed to take equipment up into those mountains so that a snowy mountain hydroelectric system could be built so that snow melting on the mountain could not run quickly to the Pacific, but it could be channeled to slow moving rivers to the west. So they needed pipes and power lines and buildings to do that, and this railroad provided that facility. It has been retired, that railroad. The buildings have been made, the electric systems have worked, the dams have been created, and they provide for irrigation. And it's Australia's seventh wonder of the world, and people visit it. And I wonder if what we do here with a rail trail could not be done in Australia too, and they have done that. And there are elements of what we could share with each other. Could, for instance, my brother-in-law, who grew up on the banks of what is now a dam, with dairy farming, and I wonder if a simulated dairy farm could not allow the public and visitors to see what a dairy farm was like, or other facilities along the line, other natures. The railroad went across a large trestle, which is interesting. Could there be international visits to this trail? I would hope so. And so we're then dealing with a different audience. We're dealing with an audience that has also to deal with native people. Australian Aboriginals live and work nearby, and they haven't been treated very well. So how do we infuse the Caucasian settlement with the native population that's been controlled? This last little while, some mining companies have been seriously castigated because they moved through Aboriginal artifacts mainly to get the high quality iron ore underneath. So there's been big debates about this. So the little things we might do in Rantoul, Paxton, Walden, other places are a small element of a more general concern for a rapidly dwindling ecosystem around the world. And I'm thinking that I'm getting near to the end, and I like to have WEFT present their case for community action, for wonderful music. And I have the temerity to think that our building, which is next door, might one day be a visual element for WEFT. It may not be possible, but there's the realization this last week that WEF was having a hard time putting in a visual message to its people, and there's an opportunity to go to visual as well as to radio, and there are certain messages that WEF can provide that other agencies cannot provide because they're an independent, not-for-profit, community-oriented station. So uh, with that, I think I would like to encourage you to take out your camera, whether it be a cell phone with not the crispness of a specialized camera, but adequate, and uh, to do your attempt to create films, whether they're family films or group films or really specialized events where you might be the author or the creator of a serious film that would go to many, many people. So onward and upwards with your thoughts. And this is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.